Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to ResearchWorks podcast here at EACD and IAACD in Heidelberg 2025. And today, my guest is a friend of the show. We speak with each other every time I'm in Europe now for EACD. So I call him the resident muscle guy, Assistant Professor Sudarshan Dayanidhi from Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. Welcome back again.
Thank you, Dana. You know, I'm always happy to talk about muscle.
I love it. And every time I talk to you, there's like a new advancement in muscle. And I think I said this to you last time as well, like muscle, there's so much in muscle. It is not just a simple topic. There's so much in there and it has so many implications on what we do. And I know that a talk that you're doing here today is on macrophages, which I don't know what that is. So I love that. So you're here to teach me. Tell me, Sudarshan, what are macrophages?
Yeah, so I think over the years, I've been interested in different elements of muscle. And as you say, muscle is vast.
Yeah.
And people spend their careers talking about actually researching muscle. And obviously our interests are how muscle changes in children with cerebral palsy. And one of the things that people have been interested in is the muscle stem cell population, which is the one which helps do repair. Like, whenever we go for a run or anything, or we go lift weights or anything, and we kind of injure our muscles, the muscles repair themselves. And the way it works is we have muscle stem cells, and those muscle stem cells are the ones which help repair, but they don't work alone. So their other key friends are macrophages. And macrophages are these so-called inflammatory cells or immune cells.
Right.
And they come in from like the bloodstream.
Okay.
They also live in muscle.
Okay.
And what they do is they sort of create the initial phase of repair. So they will help, and they're like the signalers saying, okay, here we are, like, we need to like start doing things here. Everybody come on over here. This is where repair is needed.
Right.
And so they create this, and within macrophages, there are sort of two so-called types. One is M1 macrophages, which is early repair, and M2 macrophages, which is late repair. And they create different inflammatory environments. So that's why they're called inflammatory cells, is that the M1 macrophages are the ones which are actually creating a pro-inflammatory environment to make sure repair happens properly. Initially, they want to clean out all the debris, whatever little micro tears that we have, all of those things need to be taken out. And so that's what they're doing, is helping with all of that.
Okay.
Then the muscle stem cells come in, or satellite cells come in, and they're like, okay, now that everything is clean, let's start building.
Oh, fantastic.
And then the macrophages hang around, and then the M2 macrophages, they're the ones who are like, okay, guys, everything is done, let's go. So they're in some ways a controller. And then this is, people in the immune world think of macrophages as the master controller of all kinds of things. And I'm not a macrophage person. I'm interested in a very simple question, is that, as I do, is that when you look at children with cerebral palsy when they're walking, at least clinically, it feels like they're undergoing a lot of stress within that muscle. They're loading that.
Yes.
And when we walk, we don't, of course, we load the muscle, but it doesn't look like we're loading it the same way that they do. And a few people have, proposed, some people have shown, for example, my friend Ferdinand von Walden at Karolinska has shown that there is a higher inflammatory markers within muscle in terms of like gene expression.
Right.
And so our question was to know if you have presumably higher inflammation within muscle or even systemically, as some other people proposed. The question is, within muscle, are there more macrophages? Are there less macrophages? Is it a pro-inflammatory environment? Is it less, And that's how I got into macrophages, honestly.
That is really interesting, because you've come back to, I guess, the controller, isn't it? Because you're right, when children are walking, we know that there's increased force, inflammation happens, but within that environment, does it mean that there's a lot of inflammation already? So do the M1 cells even want to turn on because it's ready, or are they reduced, which is why so many questions. Okay, what do we know about it at the moment?
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about this afternoon. So I think nobody has done like a detailed, like muscle-specific, like macrophage profile, if you will.
Right.
And so that's why we got into it, is because our previous work showed that there is, like, within the muscles which are weaker, the contractured muscles, the gastroadductors, in this case, we showed that there is a higher abundance of satellite cells. And we don't necessarily know why that is. Whereas in like the non-contractured muscles, in our case, the vastus lateralis, they're lower. So we wanted to know if the satellite cells are higher because there's more inflammation going on, and so there presumably would be more macrophages.
Ah.
And so that's where we are. And
Okay.
so what we did is we got a bunch of the same people on whom we had done our
Sure.
previous studies.
Yes.
And so we are just measuring macrophages to see if there's any difference there. And what we found is kind of surprising to an extent, in the sense that we found that overall there's no big change in macrophage population within these muscles which are weaker. So the muscles which we think, we are loading, or the
Yeah.
kids are loading a
Sure.
lot. And, for example, the gastrocs are they're much more atrophic, or they're much smaller. And when kids are walking with that, I would imagine there'd be high amount of inflammation. And we found that there were no differences in macrophage populations, either in total macrophages or in M1s or M2s. And we also had a control group, which is kids with ACL injuries. And ACL injury is a huge stimulator of a pro-inflammatory, that muscle, the vastus lateralis, after an ACL injury undergoes all kinds of inflammatory changes, which we haven't shown, a lot of other people have shown before. And so they all look the same. But the interesting thing is that within the contractured muscles and the ACL injured muscles, they have a higher percentage of M2 macrophages than M1 macrophages, but not in the vastus lateralis. So we think that there's something going on within the subpopulations, which are, they might be changing the way that muscle is, overall the environment of the muscle is.
Yeah.
But that was the number one finding. But the number two finding and number three finding, I think, are more interesting. So number two finding was that, as I mentioned, that some of these muscles have a high number of satellite cells. And I also told you macrophages and satellite cells work together, specifically in the context of repair.
Yeah.
So if you look at, in a normal scenario, your macrophage content and your satellite cell content should have no association with each other.
Right.
Because they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
They're just hanging out, chilling.
Yeah.
But what we found is within the muscles which are contractured, there is a strong association between satellite cell abundance and macrophage abundance. And that's the same even in ACL injury, but not in the vastus lateralis or non-contractured muscle. And so we think that, there is something presumably the muscles which are weaker or contractured might be having more inflammation. So these macrophages are helping repair. But then it gets more interesting because we sort of look at M1s and M2s, and it's only the M1s which are associated, not the M2s.
Oh, so it's nothing really kind of switching it off in a way.
Yeah, so I think it's either nothing kind of it's there to switch it off, or somehow something is different in the cells. They call it cell-cell communication.
Okay.
In in the cell biology world.
Okay.
So there's something going on within that sort of thing, that maybe all these cells are just stuck in the initial part, and then they don't really either do more repair, or there's nothing to repair, or they don't know what to do, and then they just go away. And
That's interesting, isn't it?
yeah.
So what do you think needs to happen next now? Where to for you for this research? Because it's interesting.
Yeah, and there was another sort of thing. There are two more things that I want to talk about before I talk about that.
Okay, there's more.
There's more. The
love
other interesting thing, which makes sort of sense, is that there is positive associations with capillary density, or the amount of blood vessels we have, and how many macrophages these kids have, again, only in the contractured muscle, not in the non-contractured muscle. So, there's more things saying the blood supply is the macrophages are coming in and they're doing something. And then the sort of, to get to your question, the last finding we have is that, but we don't find any associations with function in the terms of the distance these kids can walk, or anything of that sort. So it's kind of a puzzling thing of we don't know why the macrophages are associated only in some muscles and not the others. But I think that the findings have a lot of implications for what, and again, as I said, we don't know much about this area at all. But the reason it's important is because when we do rehab, these kids are using these muscles, we're trying to do strengthening, we're trying to do all kinds of things to make them be more functional. And when we do all of that, after that, there is repair. And, all that repair that's going on, there are satellite cells, macrophages, everybody's talking to each other. They come in and then they repair the cells, or repair the muscle. Now, the thing that we don't know and which would be very important to know is, let's say, like this is just like these are also biopsies we got from kids when they're having surgery.
Yes.
So in an ideal world, we want to know what happens before you do therapy and what happens after you do therapy.
Yeah.
And so if we can, like, get some like needle biopsies or something, like, I just saw you were talking to Kat before
Yes,
me.
I was. Yeah.
And Kat does all these like microneedle biopsies in kids. And so if we could do something like that to look at what happens in macrophages before we do any sort of like therapies, and then what happens after that, that will help tell us a lot in terms of like how, like why are they there? Is there some inherent wrong cell signaling, or is it just that the environment itself is so pro-inflammatory that these cells are just like, okay, let's just stay here, like let's just see what happens. So
it has some really important implications. I'm thinking, if I've got it right, is when we're designing rehab programs, therapy programs, we're always thinking about muscle, how we strengthen, our dosage, our intensity, our rest and recovery. This has implications on all of that, and it can help us to really understand why maybe some kids do well, some kids just don't seem to.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think this is where we always talk about dosage and recovery, but when we talk about it, we talk about it in terms of number of times kids get therapy.
Yeah.
Like, what are what intensity are we doing things? How long are they doing it? But we don't have like a very clear understanding, at least as a muscle nerd, what happens within those muscles.
Yeah.
And then, for some kids, they're like exhausted after their therapies. And obviously some of it is central factors of obviously doing therapies. Is also, there's a lot of motor learning and things going on. It's not just muscle, obviously.
Yeah.
But then I'm sure there are things which are happening within muscle which are different for everybody depending on their intensity.
Absolutely.
And, like in the world outside of like what we do, like, in any sort of athletics or like even general recreational, we all have like, Garmin watches and like, we're used to like, recovery time 24 hours, recovery time 48 hours, and those things use like heart rate or something like that, some version of that, but really like coming up with something like that is our next sort of precision medicine thing.
I love that.
For
That's
kids,
fantastic.
so we can figure out, when do we do therapy with them? How does their muscle change in response to therapy? And then how do they recover from it?
That's right. What's the capacity of the actual muscle itself?
Exactly. And that's unfortunately a wholly unknown or holy grail. And it's completely unknown right now. And
I believe that you're probably going to discover it, Sudarshan. It's exciting.
Thank you.
I can see where this is going, And should I set a timeline when I talk to you next time, wherever that conference might be?
Now, the other thing, which is, this is more philosophical a little bit, but the other thing that's interesting is because we also know that in kids with cerebral palsy, there are changes which happen in collagen and extracellular matrix.
Sure, yeah.
And all the stuff that I do, I basically steal from other fields. So I read extensively in other areas and then try to apply it to kids with CP.
Yeah.
And in the aging community, there's a lot of interest in macrophages because the idea is that M1 to M2, and I said that there are two different types, M1 and M2, but in reality, what happens, the M1s become M2s. So there's a transition.
They transition, okay.
And that transition is what, at least in the aging literature, some people think that's where things go wrong. And if they sort of either transition too quickly and they become M2s without doing their job of like clearing things out or like telling phagocytes and other things to come and clear things out, then they create a different kind of an environment. They create a it's technically called anti-inflammatory, pro-inflammatory kind of a thing. But the idea is that you can have more fibrosis if things don't like transition properly.
Is that why the older I get, it feels harder to recover?
I cannot answer that question. Just kidding. No, but there is some truth to it, right? Like, and people have known for a while, like young people recover very quickly from
they do
all kinds of things, physical activity.
They do. I remember those days.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think that there is, my point is that I'm thinking there's more information coming out every day from like other areas of like research, not just in children with cerebral palsy, that we can potentially use. And
well, the implications are huge because obviously children become adults.
Exactly.
And we know that, reduced physical activity does happen. So
yes.
More contracture, we know it's not a progressive condition, but musculoskeletally, we know we see it more.
Yeah. And I think anecdotally, most clinicians know that as children with cerebral palsy become adults, their capacity for movement reduces.
Yeah.
And not in everybody, obviously, but in some people who used to walk more, they don't walk as much, or
That's
like,
right.
or they spend
And you
more.
can't just put it back to just height and weight, because sometimes
No.
those things don't always change.
Yes, exactly.
Something else is happening.
Yes. So I think that's where I think muscle recovery is an
Yeah.
interesting area
Yeah.
that we have. As far as I know, nobody has looked at in children or in adults, and I think that's where I think the future needs to be, so we can figure out.
That's why we've got you.
Yeah,
I love it. I really love it. I love how every time we speak, you make muscle so interesting.
Thank you.
And I remember, because you're a physiotherapist or physical therapist
I
by
am a physiotherapist.
background.
Yeah, that's right.
And then here you are, absolute muscle. Like you just got into muscle and then you got into it, like proper self-professed muscle nerd.
Yes.
But we need that, and we need that level of research, because there's, as a clinician myself, I can see differences. I don't know why, and I'm trying to guess. Wouldn't it be great, as a biomarker, it's a big, talking point at the moment. If I could just know that this child is likely to take a bit longer to respond,
Yes.
we can plan accordingly. We can be so much more efficient with our services with limited resources, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in the future, as not for me, but for the field, I think is that we can come up with some sort of way of knowing what happens within muscle and what we can measure in blood.
Yeah.
Then I think that's where, so as I said, a lot of this stuff comes from blood. So as you can imagine, there's like all kinds of other systemic inflammatory markers floating around. So if we can
sure.
even measure that, see how that is associated with
Interesting.
recovery times within muscle, that would be like the dream.
That's amazing. Well, today you enlightened me about macrophages. When you walked by the other day, he said, "I'm going to talk to you about macrophages." I was like, "Oh my gosh, I do not know what that is, but I look forward to learning." I feel like I've just got the best masterclass, and so did everyone listening. So thank you so much for doing that for us today, Sudarshan.
Thank you, Dana.
An absolute pleasure to all of you guys listening. I really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I would really encourage you to go back into our series to look at all of the work that Sudarshan has done as well, because this is a nice longitudinal follow-up, really, isn't it? And we'll keep following the progression of muscle. But it's an important area for all of us. So hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.